Calvin Brooks did not think of himself as a man with savings worth stealing. He thought of himself as careful, boring even. The kind of retired man who bought the cheaper coffee and still clipped coupons, not because he had to, but because it was a habit that made him feel in control. He had worked 35 years in municipal maintenance, the kind of work nobody notices until a streetlight fails or a storm hits. He fixed what other people ignored. He showed up early. He stayed late. He retired without drama. He also did one more thing that made him proud in a quiet way. He saved. Not in a flashy portfolio sense, in an envelope sense, in a savings account sense, in a slow, stubborn, almost old-fashioned sense. He saved for emergencies. He saved for his granddaughter's future. He saved because his father had always said a man without a cushion can be pushed around. Calvin had no interest in being pushed around. The money was not illegal. It was not drug money. It was not some mysterious stash. It was the result of overtime, careful budgeting, and one small inheritance from an aunt who had left him a little something because he was the only one who visited her consistently. Calvin had withdrawn a large amount of cash that week for a very simple reason. His daughter had called him with panic in her voice. Her car had died at the worst possible time. She needed a reliable used car quickly because her job schedule was unforgiving. Calvin had promised to help, and Calvin, like a lot of men his age, did not trust wiring money for a private sale. He wanted to pay in person, with cash, in daylight, with his eyes open. He wanted a receipt. He wanted the title signed correctly. He wanted it done clean. So that afternoon, he put the envelope in a small lockbox, placed the lockbox inside a plain tote bag, and set the bag on the passenger seat. He also had a folder with paperwork, because Calvin did not go anywhere without paperwork. He drove carefully, not because he was nervous, because he had learned that you do not give anybody an excuse. As he turned onto a 4-lane road heading toward the used car lot, he noticed a police cruiser behind him. He did not think much of it at first. In his neighborhood, police cruisers were always somewhere. A presence. Sometimes a comfort, sometimes a warning. Then the lights flashed. Calvin's stomach tightened in that immediate, involuntary way. He checked his speed. He checked his mirrors. He signaled, pulled into a gas station lot, and stopped in a spot away from the pumps like he had been taught. He put both hands on the steering wheel. He waited. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser, both white, both young enough that Calvin had socks older than their careers. One approached his window with the posture of a man already convinced he was about to find something. The other hung back, scanning the car. The first officer asked for license and registration. Calvin complied, moving slowly, narrating his actions because he had learned to do that. He handed over the documents. The officer glanced at them, then said, Calvin had a broken brake light. Calvin blinked. He had checked his car recently, but he also knew bulbs fail. It was plausible. The way the officer said it, though, did not sound like a normal traffic stop. It sounded like a doorway. Calvin said he was not aware, and he would fix it immediately. The officer asked where Calvin was headed. Calvin hesitated for half a second. Honesty should have been the simplest thing in the world, yet he knew how questions can be used. He answered anyway, calmly. He said he was going to help his daughter buy a used car. The officer's eyes flicked toward the passenger seat. Calvin saw it, the glance, the calculation. The officer asked what was in the bag. Calvin felt heat rise under his collar. He said it was personal. The officer asked again, sharper, What was in the bag? Calvin said cash for a car purchase. The officer's eyebrows lifted as if Calvin had admitted to transporting a suitcase of contraband. His tone changed. He asked how much. Calvin told him. The officer whistled softly, almost theatrically, and said that was a lot of cash to be driving around with. Calvin said it was his money. The officer asked why he did not use a bank check. Calvin said he preferred cash for a private sale. The officer leaned closer and asked Calvin to step out of the vehicle. Calvin felt the first real flash of fear. Not because he thought he had done something wrong, because he knew how quickly an ordinary stop could become a story written by someone else. He stepped out slowly, hands visible, posture steady. The second officer approached closer now, standing on Calvin's other side, narrowing the space around him. The first officer asked if Calvin had any weapons. Calvin said no. The officer asked if Calvin had ever been arrested. Calvin said no. Then came the question Calvin hated most because it was designed to sound casual. The officer asked whether Calvin had anything illegal in the car. Calvin said no. The officer asked if Calvin would consent to a search. Calvin's heart thumped. He knew the old rule. If you consent, you lose control. If you refuse, you may be punished anyway. Calvin said, politely, that he did not consent to a search and asked whether he was being cited for the brake light or free to go. The officer's face tightened. He said Calvin was acting nervous. Calvin almost laughed. Of course he was nervous. A police officer was staring at his money like it did not belong to him. Calvin repeated that he did not consent. He asked again for the citation. The officer stepped back and said he was calling for a K-9 unit. Calvin felt his stomach drop. He knew what that meant. Waiting. Escalation. A delay that made him look suspicious simply because he had to stand there and endure it. Calvin stood by his car while people at the gas station glanced over and then looked away. The officers talked quietly to each other and occasionally looked at Calvin like he might run, even though he was a 68-year-old man in comfortable shoes. The K-9 unit arrived 20 minutes later. A third officer walked up with a dog, confident, almost smug. The dog circled the car. Calvin watched the handler's body language. He saw the tiny cues, the leash adjustment, the pause at the passenger side. Then the handler said, the dog alerted. Calvin's head snapped up. He did not shout. He simply said, that was impossible. The officers said the alert gave them probable cause. They searched the car. They opened the tote bag. They opened the lockbox. They counted the cash right there, on the hood, in the open, in front of strangers who were now fully watching. Calvin felt his face burn with humiliation. He felt exposed, like someone had dumped his private life onto a public table. The officer held up the envelope and asked Calvin where the money came from. Calvin told him, over time, savings, inheritance. He offered his bank records. He offered proof. The officer shook his head like he had heard all the stories before and said that did not matter. That was the moment Calvin realized he was not in a traffic stop anymore. He was in a forfeiture stop. The officer told Calvin that based on the K-9 alert and the amount of cash, they had reason to believe the money was connected to illegal activity. The officer told Calvin the cash would be seized as evidence. Calvin stared at him. Evidence of what? Evidence of being careful. Evidence of being a black man with money. Calvin asked whether he was being arrested. The officer said no. Calvin asked whether he was being charged with a crime. The officer said no. Calvin asked how they could take his money if he was not being arrested and not being charged. The officer said, "Civil forfeiture." Calvin had heard the phrase on the news. It always sounded like something that happened to other people with messy lives, not to retirees in gas station lots. The officer handed Calvin a receipt, a thin piece of paper with an amount and a case number and language that made it sound temporary and official. The officer told Calvin he could contest it through the proper process. Calvin watched them put his cash into an evidence bag as if it belonged to the state now. Then they let him go. No ticket for the broken light, no warning slip, no explanation of why he was stopped in the first place beyond that line. Just a car with a normal man inside, driving away without the money he had spent decades saving. Calvin sat at the next red light with his hands shaking. He felt rage, humiliation, and something else that scared him more: helplessness. He called his daughter and tried to keep his voice steady. He told her he had been stopped. He told her he could not make it with the cash. He did not tell her yet that the money had been taken. He did not want her panic on top of his. He drove home and sat at his kitchen table and stared at the receipt like it was written in another language. He read phrases like administrative forfeiture and claimant and deadline. It felt designed to make you give up, designed to make you miss a step, designed to let the money become theirs by default. Calvin did not give up. He called the police department the next morning and asked to speak to someone about the seizure. He was bounced from voicemail to voicemail until a clerk told him he needed to contact the forfeiture unit. Forfeiture unit. Hearing those words out loud made Calvin's jaw clench. He called the forfeiture unit. He got a recorded message. He left his name and case number. Nobody called back. He went to the station in person with the receipt and asked what he needed to do. A desk officer told him to file a claim through the district attorney's office. District attorney. Calvin went home and printed forms he barely understood. He filled them out carefully. He attached copies of his bank withdrawal slip. He attached a copy of the note he had written to himself about the car purchase. He attached a letter from his daughter explaining the situation. He mailed everything certified. 2 weeks later, he received a letter stating his claim was incomplete. He needed to provide additional documentation proving the source of the funds, proving the source of his own savings. Calvin felt a laugh in his throat that did not come out. He went to his bank and requested records. He printed years of statements. He highlighted deposits. He highlighted withdrawals. He pulled the inheritance paperwork. He got a notarized statement. He made a binder. He sent it. Another letter arrived. The district attorney's office acknowledged receipt. Then nothing. Calvin's daughter borrowed a car from a friend. She took extra shifts. She tried not to show her fear. Calvin watched her struggle and felt guilt burn in his chest. This was why he had saved, so she would not have to struggle like that. And now, the savings were gone, trapped in a process designed to exhaust you. Calvin did the next thing he had avoided. He called a lawyer. A civil rights attorney took the case after hearing the facts. The attorney asked whether Calvin had been given a ticket. Calvin said no. The attorney asked whether Calvin had been charged. Calvin said no. The attorney asked what the K9 alert was based on. Calvin said he had no idea. The attorney asked for body camera footage. Calvin blinked. He had not even thought of that. The attorney filed a public records request for body camera video, dash camera video, and the K9 deployment logs. He also requested the reason for the stop and the maintenance record of Calvin's alleged broken light. When the videos arrived, Calvin watched them with his attorney in an office that smelled like coffee and paper. The footage began with Calvin's car driving normally. The cruiser followed. The lights came on. Calvin pulled over calmly. His hands stayed visible. The officer approached and said broken light. Then, on the audio, the officer said something to the second officer that Calvin had not heard at the time. He said he had been watching Calvin for a while because the car fit a profile. He said the driver looked like someone they had been looking for. He said he wanted to see what would happen when he asked about the bag. Calvin felt his stomach twist. Fit a profile. Someone they had been looking for. He felt the familiar sting of being reduced to a silhouette. The body camera audio captured the shift in the officer's tone when Calvin mentioned cash. It captured the officer's excitement, the way he leaned into it. It captured the moment the officer said, quietly, that cash was usually dirty. It also captured something else. When Calvin refused consent to search, the officer said on camera that Calvin was going to regret being difficult. Calvin stared at the screen, then looked away because it felt too intimate to watch someone threaten you calmly after the fact. The dash cam footage raised another question. The officer never once checked Calvin's brake lights. Not at the start, not after the search, not after releasing him. Calvin's attorney requested the vehicle inspection log. There was none. Calvin's attorney then did a simple test. Calvin's car was brought to a mechanic. The mechanic checked the lights. They worked. The brake lights were fine. So the original reason for the stop looked like a pretext. Calvin's attorney requested the K9 logs. The dog had a history. Several alerts in situations where no drugs were found. Several deployments tied to cash seizures. The handler's notes were vague. Calvin felt sick. It was a machine. A system that could turn an alert into probable cause and probable cause into money. The attorney filed a motion to suppress the seizure and demanded a hearing. The attorney argued the stop was unsupported, the search was improper, and the seizure violated Calvin's rights. He also argued that the forfeiture process was being used as punishment without charges. The district attorney responded with boilerplate language about fighting crime and following procedure. Then came the hearing date. Calvin walked into court wearing the best suit he owned. He held his binder like it was a shield. The courtroom was bright and cold. The officer who stopped him sat on a bench with a neutral expression, as if this were just paperwork. The prosecutor argued the K9 alert justified the search and the cash quantity justified the seizure. He suggested the money was connected to narcotics trafficking. He suggested Calvin's story was convenient. Calvin felt his chest tighten. He wanted to stand up and yell that he had spent his life fixing streetlights and sewer grates. He wanted to yell that he was trying to buy a car for his daughter. He wanted to yell that he had done nothing wrong. Instead, his attorney did something more effective. He played the body camera audio. He played the part where the officer admitted the stop was based on a profile. He played the part where the officer said cash was usually dirty. He played the part where the officer said Calvin would regret being difficult. He played the part where nobody checked the brake light. He presented the mechanic's statement showing the lights were working. The judge listened, face tightening little by little. Not outrage, more like the slow realization that the story being presented by the state was built on assumptions and convenient procedures. The prosecutor tried to pivot to the canine alert. Calvin's attorney presented the dog's history and asked whether the court should treat every alert as infallible, when the pattern suggested the dog was being used to justify searches, not detect crime. The judge asked whether there were drugs found. The prosecutor admitted no. The judge asked whether Calvin was charged with any crime. The prosecutor admitted no. The judge asked why the money had been held for months with no charges. The prosecutor said forfeiture was civil. The judge asked Calvin's attorney what Calvin wanted. Calvin's attorney said Calvin wanted his money returned and his record cleared. He also wanted an order preventing the department from holding the money without probable cause tied to an actual criminal case. The judge did not give a long speech. He did not need to. He ordered the money returned. He also stated on the record that the stop appeared unsupported by credible evidence of a traffic violation, that the seizure was not justified on the facts presented, and that the body camera audio raised serious concerns about pretext and improper motive. Calvin felt his throat tighten. He stared at the judge and forced himself not to cry. He did not want relief to make him look weak. He wanted the room to understand that this should never have happened. Outside the courtroom, the officer avoided Calvin's eyes. It took weeks for the money to come back, not in an envelope, not with an apology. It came as a check and a statement that sounded like administration, not accountability. Calvin deposited it and watched the numbers appear in his account again, and he felt a strange emptiness. The money had returned, but something in him had been taken with it. The attorney asked Calvin whether he wanted to sue for damages. Calvin hesitated. He was tired. He wanted to move on. Then he thought of the body camera audio, the casual threat, the idea that his savings were presumed dirty, the fact that if he had missed a deadline, the money would have become theirs permanently, the fact that his daughter's life had been disrupted because someone wanted to see what would happen. Calvin said yes. The lawsuit that followed was not glamorous. It was slow, procedural, full of motions and delays, but it forced documents into the open. It forced the department to explain its forfeiture practices. It forced training records and K-9 deployment patterns to be discussed in rooms where they could not be waved away as routine. Eventually, the department settled. They paid damages. They agreed to policy changes on documenting traffic stops and K-9 deployments. They agreed to body camera compliance reviews. They did not admit wrongdoing in plain language, but they agreed to change enough that Calvin knew the pressure had worked. Calvin used the money to help his daughter buy the car anyway. The day they signed the title, Calvin insisted on a receipt and a bill of sale and a photo of the odometer, and his daughter laughed and told him he was too much. Calvin smiled, but his eyes stayed serious, because now he understood something he had not wanted to understand. In some places, the line between law enforcement and profit can get dangerously thin. A broken light can be a pretext. A dog can be a lever. A receipt can be a weapon turned against you. And a retiree with savings can be treated like a suspect simply because the system assumes money in the wrong hands must be dirty. Calvin had spent his life fixing streetlights so other people could see where they were going. It turned out he needed his own light too. A camera. a record, and the stubborn refusal to let someone else decide what his savings meant.